Good afternoon, folks. All right. I'm Sam Flowers, your front of house manager for the Woody Guthrie Center. I'd like to welcome each and every one of you guys to our Pride Weekend special Tri-City Collective Real Talk. Yes. We always start off with our land acknowledgement. The Woody Guthrie Center honors and acknowledges that it resides in the traditional and unceded territories of the Creek, Osage, Quapaw, Wichita, Caddo, and Kickapoo tribal nations. We recognize these tribes as and the many indigenous tribe nations who have historically called Oklahoma home. By acknowledging the colonial history of its continuing impacts and correcting miseducation, we will no longer overlook how this land was occupied. We further recognize that more than a century ago, this very neighborhood was destroyed by the violence of bigotry and racial hatred in the 1921 race massacre. We acknowledge the atrocities of the past. We cannot forget that the fight for equality continues as it is far from over. We ask you to take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us here today. May this acknowledgement express the Woody Guthrie Center commitment to growing and deepening its relationship with the vibrant cultural communities that precede us and still remain. The Woody Guthrie Center is dedicated to spreading Woody's message of diversity, equality, and justice. We educate visitors, teachers, students, and scholars about Woody's life, legacy, relevance, and his important role in American history. It is our honor to share this positive message with the new generation who can create their own ripples of change. We're so glad to have each and every one of you folks here this afternoon. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our program manager, Chloe Forte.
Yeah. Thank you all for coming out. This is a really exciting weekend, and I'm really excited about this particular Real Talk. First, I want to say thank you to Carlos and the Tri-City team, Jamie, Q, Bracken, Lori, everyone who helped work on this and bring this together. This Real Talk is especially important because it ties in with our current exhibit on display in the rotating gallery. It's called Love Saves the Day, the Subterranean History of American Disco. We have two special guests, Daniel McHenry of Black Queer Tulsa and Nicky Siano. I met Daniel 2 years ago. He started Black Queer Tulsa here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It was the first group of, first Black affinity group for Black Queer Tulsans. And last year we had the first Black Queer Pride ever. So give it up for Daniel. With Nicky Siano, we have a living legend. At the age of 17, he opened the gallery in New York. David Mancuso once said that the gallery was the closest anyone had come to making a club that came close to the spirit of the Loft and emulated what he had set out to do. Also in Studio 54, opened in 1977. He was one of the first DJs on the roster. He's a phenom. He kind of revolutionized the way people approach DJing with his use of the frequency knobs, and he went off, you know? He's also very kind, and I'm very excited for you to hear exactly from his heart. So thank you all for coming out.
Thanks, Chloe. Okay, it is time to get started. I'm super excited to be with you guys today, and even to be with Nicky Siano to talk a little bit about the culture, disco, and everything that happened around that time in the 1960s and 70s. And so super excited about that. Just want to give an introduction. Real Talk Voice of the Margins is a series of curated live conversations on issues and topics of critical import to marginalized communities, including but not limited to people of color, LGBTQIA+, and economically disadvantaged citizens. Providing a voice and a platform for often voiceless people is the heart of the series. Real Talk Voicing the Margins is a partnership with the Woody Guthrie Center, the Tulsa Artists Fellowship, and Tri-City Collective. We can give them a hand. Well, Nikki, it is nice to meet you.
Hi, Daniel.
It is nice to meet you and be in front of you. I have literally been waiting to talk to you.
Get your teeth into me.
Okay, so I just want to jump right into things with you. We have experienced a severe storm and a week of power outages here in Tulsa with the importance of understanding community and its purpose, which is just to be there for each other, as we've seen in the last week. I'm curious to know what might that have looked like for the community that you built, especially in the early days of disco clubs in New York.
Well, I want to say a little background.
Of course.
I'm 68 years old, so I often say I had all my high school years in the 70s, but I grew up in the 60s. So the 60s were about civil rights, started out, JFK, MLK, and then Bobby Kennedy. And they all were addressing the rights for people. Bring up the lower class and let them be a middle class, a new middle class. Bobby Kennedy Jr. is running for president, by the way. Just a little piece of information. And at the end of the 70s, well, let me start with 69 because this was really an important, June 28th, 1969, were the Stonewall riots in New York. Now, the Stonewall riots are what pride all around the world is based on. So I was going down the West Village because in Brooklyn, New York, as a gay man, you couldn't meet other gay men. They weren't there. The only thing you would do is get beat up if you approached someone. Mm-hmm. So I sort of walked with my head down, and even then I got beat up. Yeah. I mean, I swished too much back then for people. And they would throw things at me for moving cars.
Yeah.
I would come home from school, and just on that walk to school, all of a sudden someone would stop their car and two big guys would get out, and I would be running down the block. They'd run after me and start hitting me. And at 16, I finally had enough and moved out. I came home from one of those beatings and just said, "Mom, I'm packing my stuff and throwing it in the bed. I'm never coming back here again. Don't you ever call me. I'm never coming back to this borough again." And I moved to the place where I felt accepted, the West Village, where there were other gay people.
Yeah.
And that night, I don't know if you know the whole story, because Judy Garland had died that week. And Judy Garland was like an icon for a lot of gay people. So instead of the village having 100, 200 people, there were like 2,000 people down there. Everyone had come in from every borough to just be with like-minded people to say goodbye to their icon, Judy Garland, who they related so much to. And the cops had a kind of monthly process that they would fulfill. And that was, there was a law on the books that said people of the same sex could not dance together in a liquor licensed environment. So the state of New York would give you a liquor license. If you had a liquor license from the state of New York, you could not serve a person who self-proclaimed to be gay. You couldn't serve them if they said they were gay. And two people of the same sex could not dance together in your environment. You would be closed down. And that's what they did that night. And they did it once a month without any kind of repercussion. But that night, like I said, there wasn't 200 people outside the Stonewall Inn where they went in and they stopped the music and they started bringing people out, trans people and other people, bringing them out. And one of the beloved people of Christopher Street at that time was a trans woman named Marsha P. Johnson. And Marsha P. used to say, the P stands for pay it no mind, Nikki. And I used to sit there and just talk to her on the street all the time. And that night, I wasn't there that night, I was there the second night, she was pulled out and humiliated in front of the 500 people who were outside the stone wall. And someone just screamed out, leave Marsha alone. And someone said, leave her alone. And the cop looked and said, her? And he picked up Marsha's dress. Well, that ensued with the second thing that happened was those old thick Coca-Cola bottles, they were made of glass, came flying over the crowd and landed at his feet. And then everyone just picked up, they were so frustrated and so beaten down, they just picked up the nearest thing and started throwing them. There were only 3 cops who came to that little tryst. So they were overwhelmed. They had steel garbage cans and they broke the window. They turned over a car and lit it on fire. Now that was the biggie.
Yeah.
That was the biggie. And so the second night, the riots lasted 5 nights. The second night, I come up going down the village to meet a guy or something, and still knowing Judy died, because my parents were big fans of Judy, and I come up from under the train station, under this theater, it was the West 4th Street Theater, and I see 6th Avenue is blocked. The cars are beeping, and it's blocked. And I immediately thought it was a Vietnam War protest, because it was very common back then that people would just have Vietnam War protests all over college campuses. And I said to someone, like, what's going on? And he said, we're not gonna take it anymore. Gay rights, now. And everyone around him started screaming, and I looked down the line, and they were picking people up who were sitting, blocking traffic. And they were picking them up, putting them in a paddy wagon, and as soon as they would pick them up, someone else would run and take their place. And they blocked traffic all night. Then I said to my friend Dennis, let's get out of here. There's too many people. Let's get out. So I walked around Sheridan Square, where the Stonewall was, and to 7th Avenue, and that was blocked. Then we walked down Christopher to 8th Avenue, that was blocked. So it was pretty serious. They had people had coalesced in a movement of pride, just to change that law. And that law changing is what preceded the disco explosion, because that was what the gay people needed to open up environments and not be hassled by the police. Yeah. And they did. They started popping up like crazy, and mine was one of the first. I was lucky enough to have one of the first. Actually, the second one. David opened the Loft, and then I opened the gallery in 1972.
We're definitely going to get into that. Okay.
So I just wanted to give you that foundation.
Yes, indeed. And so it sounds like definitely during that time, community, if there wasn't a community, if the community did not come together during that time, Stonewall would not have happened. We won't have the rights and things that we have now, as far as, the rights we're still fighting for now. We wouldn't have the community that we have now to even lean and depend on each other. And so I think it's awesome that we are able to actually sit down with someone who is there, at the foundation and core of our queer existence here in current life in Tulsa and everything like this. And so I'm very excited to continue this conversation. So as you painted us a picture of Stonewall and the birth of Pride, paint us a picture of how you opened the gallery in 1972. Just a couple years after Stonewall, there was a Loft, the Loft, which you started, right? Go ahead and tell us.
No, I didn't start the Loft. That was David Mancuso.
That was David, okay.
But I was right after that, I would hang out on Christopher Street, and I would be outside the Stonewall, and I would be listening to this new kind of funky ass music, and I couldn't, I'd be outside, whoa, what's this song? And as soon as people were coming out, I was saying, what's that song? What's that song? And I started collecting records, and back then they were on 45s. They were this big, and every song I was like enamored with. So I'm at my brother's house. He's 10 years older than me, and he's giving a little party, and it's dying. It's dying on the vine. So I said, Robin, that was my girlfriend at the time. I said, Robin, I'm gonna play some records. She said, go ahead, go do it. And I started playing records, and we started dancing and partying, and this one girl came up to me and she said, you like this kind of music? I'll take you out to a place that plays this. And I said, I wish I could go, but I'm only 15, and no one lets me and Robin in. And she said to us, this guy, David, is a friend of mine, and his place is a party, so he lets people underage in because he doesn't serve alcohol. And you didn't really need alcohol back then because people were taking drugs, a lot of drugs. And the drugs were so cheap, like for 50 cents, you'd get a tab of acid that you split with 2 friends, and you would be high all night dancing for 50 cents. It was wild, right? So
watch out now.
Right. She took us to the Loft, and I walked up those rickety stairs in that very bright hallway, and then there was a lady in this little alcove that took out $3. And I walked into this room that was totally dark for a minute, and then the mirrored ball came on. And I heard a sound system that was beyond anything. And I thought I had a good sound system in my house because I prided myself on the sound system I bought with my newspaper delivery money.
Hey, you gotta make it. Okay. So you got to make it.
Yeah, you got to make it any way you can.
Indeed.
And I loved music. And I loved, does anyone know who Mantovani was? He was like this orchestra leader. He was like Leonard Bernstein. And he would put out these albums that were really old-fashioned songs, but I liked them because I liked the sound of the sonics of the song. So I became into this kind of not only the music, but the sonics of the music, like how they produce the high end and how they produce the low end. And I was telling a woman right outside, these speakers that they have in the exhibit, they're called Klipschorns, and they're designed to get very low frequencies, like bass sounds that other speakers do not get. And how they do that is they're made for a corner, so they incorporate the entire room into the throw of the low end of the speaker. So it gives it the ability to go down to a much lower frequency response because it's using the room as part of the speakers.
Wow.
And those other speakers in there, the La Scalas, were designed for FDR's train presidency like speeches. He would travel across the country and they were designed for him on the train, and he would use those speakers to speak to the people about his run for president. So they have a real history. That's what David had in his house. Those two and the other two. And it was this is the size of his dance floor, exactly. This was the entire dance floor, this room. And the sound was so like a pair of headphones.
Yeah.
The best Bose headphones you can get. And I was immediately said, I gotta have one of those. I gotta have one of those. I gotta have one of those. And then I saw he was playing a song and they were flashing the lights and always in time to the music. Today, you see all these things going off. It doesn't mean a thing. But back then, every hit of the lights were matching something in the song.
Wow.
Matching a horn blast, matching a crash on a cymbal, something. So he was hitting the lights, and then they dimmed, and then he had a lamp at the other end of the room, and I'm dancing over here, and there's a lamp and 2 chairs, like a little living room. And the song comes to another break, and he dims that lamp out, and it's totally dark in the room. And I leaned into Robin and I said, I want to do this. And it wasn't about playing records. It was like creating atmosphere.
Yeah.
And that's what clubs have totally forgotten. It's so disjointed, like the light man is over there, the DJ's over here, the sound system could be in another room for all. I built my sound system so that every speaker was pointed towards me, and my booth was on the dance floor, because I didn't want people to be watching me. I wanted them to be dancing.
Yeah.
Because I was a dancer. That's what I loved. So, yes, I got my first job in 71. Due to that, at a place called the Round Table, and then I got fired from there, and I called, and Robin and I went home and we put together this real bogus kind of business plan. And it said, we need $10,000.
So how old were you whenever you made this decision?
Okay, I was 17
Okay.
when we went to my brother and said, look, we can open a club for just, because we did some research. We went and we researched how much a loft was, and we went in, we asked them how much is it to rent this place, and it was relatively very cheap. It was like $285 to rent our first loft, which
Wow.
was 3,600 square feet.
Wow.
So it was
Jeez.
twice the size of what the loft had.
Yeah.
And that year, we opened in February. I was 17. I turned 18 in March. And that May, David closed and took his whole family, workers, to Spain, and everyone just came to the gallery. And the first night we were open, this guy came to the booth and said, Nicky, I want to work for you. And it was Frankie Knuckles,
Yes.
who is the godfather of house music, he's called. And he was.
So
He
you're-
was certainly the godfather of house.
So your club was called The Gallery.
Right.
Okay, awesome. And so when did you start making those records, like getting records on vinyl and things like that? How was that process like whenever you were creating? Because I have a creative question, just for those who wanna kind of dig into the creativity of things. So just kind of explain that to me a little bit more.
Well, okay, I just made this list like off the top of my head. There was something that happened back then that never happened before. In order to have a hit record, you needed to be on the radio. That was it. There was no ifs, ands, buts about it. In 1972, if you wanted a hit record, you needed to have it played on the radio. Well, the clubs, the early years of disco changed all that, because there were only 12 clubs and there were 8 DJs, and we used to meet for breakfast.
Yeah.
And we used to share information, and we'd all play the same records. It wasn't, people would come hear me because they liked the way I played the records together. I was one of the early people that did beat matching, where you could dance through the change. I'm sorry I ever did it, because
Creative.
now they just play the same beat all night long. I can't stand that. I like different tempos. I like it to slow down and then speed up, you know. So
Yeah.
that's what I do when I play a set.
Give us some flavor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Funky Sensation is 98 beats per minute, and then everyone plays at 128 all night long. And Frankie said it. Frankie said to me, those are the plateau DJs. They play the same beat all day. And it really, you know what? It's easier to mix like that. It's easier to just put one record after another because you don't have to worry about changing the beat and everything and slowing it down a little at a time, how we used to do. And we had turntables that didn't vary the speed like the things that we use today vary speed. You can go 10% in each direction, 20% on some turntables. We had 4%. 4%, that was it. So you had to find a record that kind of matched. And radio was not playing the music. And I just want to, it would shock you. Love Is the Message was on a record called The Sound of Philadelphia by MFSB. And you all know, Soul Train, da-na-na-na-na-na-na. Well, that's called The Sound of Philadelphia, TSOP. The original did not have words. My friend David and I went to Columbia Records. We had a friend there, and she said, I want to play you this song. It's really good. And it was TSOP. We had it. Only 2 copies. He had one, and I had one that Christmas. It came out of every other record. We were playing it. I wanted to hear it. Every time I took it off the turntable, I wanted to hear it again. So I played it. And sometimes I'd play something when I first got it 8 times. That record didn't hit the air until 6 months later. We had already, as DJs, pushed it up the sales, because we couldn't push it up the play part, but we pushed it up the sales because the Billboard charts are play and sales.
Thank you.
So we pushed it up the sales part of the chart, and they have them side by side. So we pushed it up the sales part of the chart, and all of a sudden record companies start, because in the beginning they wouldn't give free records to DJs. We got a doors slammed in our face. We came one day, I came to CBS one day and I said, we're DJs and we're here for, DJ Day to get promotional product. And she said, oh, what station do you play at? And I said, oh no, we play at clubs. And she just slammed the door in our face. Didn't say another word. Didn't say goodbye or thanks for coming. She just pushed the door in our face. And that's the way it was. Until we made friends, and those friends came to the club. And they heard the records being played, and then they watched the sales chart. And this little baby, where is it? Oh, here. This is Love's Theme. I don't know if you guys know it, but it's Barry White's family. And this was an instrumental that we went to this record company, and he had these sitting on the floor, a box of them, and said, oh, we're going to throw those out. And my friend David said, well, give it to us because we like this album cover. It's a hoot. We're going to hang it on the wall. Well, this record went to number 89 on the sales chart. That's top 100. That's pretty serious.
Yeah, it's pretty big.
Without any airplay.
Wow.
Not one air. And we got a gold record for it. He got a gold, I got a gold record for it, and the 5 other DJs who were involved in it.
Wow.
And these are records that radio wouldn't even play. We were the first to play it. Just some of them. Soul Makossa, I found in a Jamaican record store on Flatbush Avenue in Brooklyn, and he played it for me, and I said, how many copies you got? He said 9. I said, give them all to me. And I gave them to all my DJ friends, and that's how we were. We were friends. It wasn't about competition. It was about camaraderie.
Yeah.
There was enough business to go around, and we were just there because we loved the music. Had nothing to do with money. We didn't even think of money. And that's how it all kind of degraded, the money thing. But anyway, Rock Your Boat. I was the first person to play that. Rock Your Baby, Never Can Say Goodbye, Honeybee, Cherchez la Femme, Turn the Beat Around,
Wow.
Love Hangover. Love Hangover, the first night I got it, it was on a test pressing. And they gave it to me the Motown person gave it to me, and I played it 8 times. From the very first note, from the slow part. I loved it so much. And I was freaking out because I loved Diana Ross, and that was like her first big dance floor hit. And I said, oh my God, I loved it. Well, there was a record store down the village called Vinyl Mania, and there was a line Sunday morning to get Love Hangover. He didn't have it because it wasn't out yet. But that's the kind of business we generated. People bought records when they heard it at the clubs because we played it with such gusto and love, and it was the only kind of outlet for that kind of music. If you loved to dance and you heard it in the club, you went out and bought a copy.
Yeah. So I have a question.
Please, Daniel.
To try to pinpoint, the creativity aspect and the opportunity to create, and how successful you were in creating. Young creatives are finding new ways to create, and it seems like they have plenty of access to create, so they can get famous at doing on TikTok. I mean, as we can see. What was it like during that time as a minority disco DJ and club creator to have the ability to create freely and be able to be successful like that? Like, what was that like?
It was a different thing in the industry because gay people back then were, non gratis.
Right.
It was like,
Shunned.
you did not get a record contract, you did not get any kind of status if you said, I'm gay. Yeah, it wasn't the days of George Michael being in a bathroom and getting arrested and then doing an album about it, which was so cool, and then going on with his fabulous career. That didn't happen back then. If you were found out gay, they just ripped up your contract. And I heard many times with my good friend D.C. LaRue, who had a big hit called Cathedrals, they would say, and I heard people saying, I'm not booking that faggot. And that's the kind of stuff that went down back then.
Yeah.
So it still was very prejudicial. I was lucky enough to own my own club. My brother and I, my brother is 10 years older than I, so he was 27 when the club opened. And we went to his house and we said, we went through the whole proposal, and he said, we just need $10,000. And he said, do you know? I said, no, what? He said, I just settled that accident I had 10 years ago for $12,000. That's serendipity. That's God in your life.
Yes.
That's the universe putting something
Indeed.
and just opening doors for you. And I always say, if it's right,
The time will happen.
the doors will just open.
They will.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with you. And so I know you were talking about earlier how the clubs were really how the sound was, and the blending and the mixing and things like that. Now I heard that since you know how to mix very well, did you come up with the dual mixer?
Well, that was everyone. No one was beat matching.
Mm-hmm.
They were calling it a blend.
Yeah.
And basically people were listening in the headphone. Some people didn't even have headphones. My first job, I didn't even have a headphone, which is the cue. You hear the record that's not playing. Well, some people didn't even have it back then. And they would but the people who did, they would be putting the beginning of the record on over and over and over until it sort of matched, and then they would turn up the volume and mix it in. Well, I came along and I started putting stuff underneath the vinyl so that it would slip, and they didn't have direct drive turntables yet, which you could really slip with easily.
Yeah.
They have belt driven back then, so you had to really gingerly hold that record. And I would hold it on the beat, and then I'd push it a little bit, and then I'd match it. And so I was the first person who started the whole beat matching craze. And people started hearing that, and then everyone started doing it. And then I had Love Is a Message. I loved that record so much, and I had a dream that because it was just 3 minutes and 16 seconds, the groove of it that you played over and over until someone, released it on a bootleg and edited it all together. But I had 2 copies, and I'm playing it back to back, and I had this dream that I played this sound effect of this big airplane while I was mixing the 2, and I said, I gotta bring in a 3rd turntable. And I did. I brought in my 3rd turntable, and I did that night, and they started saying, turn this motherfucker out. And no, I had never heard that before. It was the first time they were saying, right to the beat, all night long. They were going nuts. And really, I mean, the place was saying it so loud that at points it was drowning out the music.
Wow.
Yeah, it was everybody in the place was united. So then after that, I see every club had a 3rd turntable. And on that 3rd turntable, someone's coat, drinks, whatever was, it was the placeholder for your garbage. And no one ever used it.
No.
It was, I don't know. Creativity.
Exactly.
I always think about, what could be better. Like, my dance floor initially was in a big room like this, but I felt that if it was in a separate room and I had a wall, the lights would impact much more on the people when they went on and off. And the sound would sound better because you wouldn't have it just going out into a big auditorium. It would be closer. And I don't know if you guys know this, but when you put a speaker in a corner, it produces 10 dB more sound. So it produces more volume, and it also produces more low end. So I did that. I created corners on my dance floor to put the speakers in the corners. And stuff like that, they don't even look at today.
Yeah.
It's all about... As a matter of fact, they don't even spend any money on the sound system. The sound system was the most expensive thing in my club. The guy, Alex Rosner, came and he said, we had $10,000. He said, I can do it for $6,500. Just $65. That's more than half our budget. We got to put down a wooden floor. We got to paint the place. We want to build walls. And he said, $6,500. And we said, okay.
Wow.
Because we knew he was the best sound man at the time. And today, they spend $6,500 on the bar and how it looks,
True.
and about $500 on the sound system if they have that left over. It's really awful. I mean, people are coming to dance. People are coming to dance.
There's no soul in it. There's no funk in it. There's no creativity in it. It's just very bland.
It's all about the do, re, mi, and that's it. That's what it came, So
where do you draw your inspiration from? Like, I heard you like James Brown.
Oh, I love James Brown.
Yeah, tell us a little about
I feel James was really the backbone of all the dance music that came out. Papa Got a Brand New Bag, and of course, Sex Machine was, in 1970, when that record came out, it was the biggest record on everyone's dance floor. And there was another song on that album called Give It Up and Turn It Loose. And those 2 songs were the backbone of everything that was created after that. And then there was this guy called Earl Young, and Earl Young was the drummer for a group called The Tramps. He also was the drummer for everything that MFSB played on. So every song by the OJs, every song by Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, every song by Teddy Pendergrass, every song by Billy Paul was him playing. And he developed this new kind of groove. Instead of 4 on the floor is... He would do a little syncopated one. And that little was the disco beat. That became the disco groove. And South Soul hired him, and he did Dr. Love and Hit and Run and 10% and all those great records for them. And Dr. Love was one of the greatest records. I don't know if you know this story, but Tom Moulton was a fantastic guy who mixed all these club records. And he had a heart attack while he was mixing that record. And he stayed in the studio till it was done. And then he went to the doctor. And the doctor said, "Are you crazy?
Dedication.
What the hell did you do? Why weren't you here sooner?" And he said to him, "I was mixing Dr. Love." And the guy just got so mad at him. And 2 months later, he came in for a checkup. And the guy said, "By the way, I love the record."
So, how did the disco scene change the landscape for minority groups and the people in the gay community? Kind of talk about that, your experience with that as well.
Well, it rose up because of the riots.
Yeah.
We were able to open a lot of different gay clubs, and it's called a double-edged sword, because all the women love to dance, don't they?
Yes.
Women just love to dance.
Yes.
And you straight men, they could take
like
it
to
or leave
watch.
it sometimes. So all our girlfriends were going out with the gay friends, and the boyfriend would very begrudgingly come along. Well, they had to learn how to dance because, they wanted to pick up more women. And all the girls were out with us, They were all out at the gay club. Studio 54 was a prime example of that kind of thing. It was always all the girls were out with us, and the boys would come along just because they wanted to see their women. And that's why disco sucks and all that.
Oh, yeah.
This was part of the whole thing. That and radio. Radio was disemboweled by us. They didn't get payola anymore because we did their job for free. And they were forced to play our records after a while because they were climbing the charts, and people would call on the request line over and over and say, "Play Soul Makosa. We don't have it and we don't play that." And they say, "Oh, I'm never listening again to your station." Boom. That's the way it was. People were adamant about hearing this new kind of music. And the thing is, they would go out 3 and 4 times a week, and they would hear these records over and over. So they would go out and buy them. And that was the big difference. Now it's all disjointed. There are so many kinds of dance music,
Yeah.
There's the electronic, there's the house heads, there's the disco heads, there's the classics, there's the pop. And it's become so disjointed that we've lost our power. Yeah. We've lost our stronghold on it. And that was, part of the guys wanting their power back, the record companies wanting the power back, and Studio 54, I was the first DJ there, along with Richie Kazar, the 2 opening DJs, and they had the most terrible door policy ever. It was like, you can get in, but sorry, you're not dressed right. Polyester? No, we don't allow that in this club.
Wow.
It was really, he was really rude to Steve. Steve was a good friend of mine. I worked for him at his first club, Enchanted Gardens. That's why he hired me for Studio 54. But he wasn't like that. He wasn't like that 3 years earlier. But at his first club, Enchanted Gardens, sometimes I'd play a Diana Ross record, and then I'd do a little medley of the Supremes hits, do a few of them together. And he would come up and he'd go, "Nicky, play one more. I love Diana Ross. So 3 years later, he's snorting coke with her upstairs at Studio 54. That changes the fucking person. It changes
I bet
them.
it does.
And he's what we call a mensch, in the Jewish way of saying it. And he just lost that. He lost it. The money, the drugs, it just ruined him. And I'll never forget, I was at Studio. This was after I had gotten fired, but the gallery was still open. And I would go there a lot. And he'd be walking down the big staircase, this big grand staircase in a tuxedo like this.
Oh, man.
So it was sad.
Yeah,
it was
goodness.
really sad.
So
sad.
I wanted to. I know there's been a huge thing about disco dying, and if you can kind of explain about that era and about that time frame when people started saying that disco was dying and how the name disco even was removed out of the genre and dance was replaced with it. So, kind of talk about that a little bit.
Well, in 1975, okay, so we're talking about the early 70s first, 1975, 1976, dance music became the thing that every artist wanted to have a hit as under that beat. Every artist wanted to have a record that way, and all the artists who had records that way were being revered. So the record companies started to see that this record, if it said disco on it, it would sell 100,000 copies out of the box, which means without any airplay, without people even hearing it, they could sell a piece of garbage in that thing, as long as it said disco in 1975. Billboard, who has the charts, created a disco forum, this big thing where everyone got together. I was so stoned when I spoke there. Oh my God. There was 10 people on the panel, and they asked us all the same question. By the time they got to me, I was asleep. I had my head on the table, and they said, Nicky, the same question. What do you think about blah, blah? And I looked up 5,000 people, and I said, I agree. The whole place loved it, all through the whole disco forum. I agree, Nicky, I agree. Yeah, okay, enough. So that was the progression. It became a thing that the record companies were ignoring and saying, this is another fad, like they said about digital music. Ha ha ha! And they just missed the boat, and then they hopped on big time. So they started putting disco on. Ethel Merman's Broadway sings Broadway disco. Who the hell wanted to hear that? It was horrible. Yeah. It was horrible. Disco Duck. Oh, come on. It was really, every piece of garbage was getting relayed into these big disco banner sleeves so they would sell. People were getting burnt, okay? And it just started a really bad, then the stuff at Studio 54, the boys going out to run after their women, all those, the radio people hating. And this radio person, Steve
Dahl,
thank you, someone.
Crazy man.
Yeah, Steve Dahl started this big campaign in Chicago. Disco sucks. It's dead. It's really dead. And we're going to burn at Kaminsky Park. We're going to burn every disco record you have. But they didn't bring disco records. No. They brought soul records and R&B records and Stevie Wonder records. Stevie Wonder. Come on.
They didn't know nothing.
Yeah. So anyway, they're burning this big pile, and they so-called bury disco. And then Frankie Knuckles comes along and says, I have this house record. It's really good. And house was everything that disco was in the beginning. It was that backbeat. It was that pure and simple sound. Yeah. It was those great spiritual lyrics. It was the salvation of the clubs at that time. Yeah. So really, disco morphed into house music.
I love house music.
Yeah.
Were you around with, voguing came into play?
Course.
Yes, talk about that. I need to know a little about that part.
Well, it was uncanny when Vogue came out, especially. Yes. But if you look at the film that they're showing here, Love is the Message, my film about the it was shot at the Gallery.
We're going to plug that.
It's the only movie that actually shows you people on a dance floor at that time, because there wasn't even a video camera yet. There was nothing but film. And 6 film students came into the club one night and they said, we really want to make a movie here. And we were like, okay, go ahead. And they brought in these big cameras and everything, and you'll see people voguing in the movie all the time. And this is 1976, so it's way before the song, way before it even got any traction. But they're on the platform around and they're voguing. And it was a sensation. And then I'll never forget, I was on Christopher Street when the song came out, and this guy had a convertible, and he was playing the song, and it was coming down the street, and as it passed people, they would get up. But it was a phenomenon, and that was her best song. Come on, let's face it.
Yes.
Really was.
That sounds like a movement during that time, because honestly, Vogue and house music is literally changing our culture here in Tulsa as well. Tulsa just got into Vogue, got into the ballroom scene, so we're going to have you come down and DJ one of these times if you like. But no, we definitely, are starting to learn a little bit more about the birthing of house music and birthing of disco and voguing and the meaning that it has to the community and to our culture and things like that. And I read that you were very affected by the AIDS epidemic that happened in the 80s. And so tell us a little about how that crisis affected you personally.
Well,
as we talk
first
about
of all,
community.
in the 70s, you couldn't help it. I took way too many drugs. And I ended up in 77, my best friend introduced me to this drug called heroin. And I became addicted to it. And that led to the closing of the gallery. And then I went on to play at another club where I drew lots of people, but they had, like with Larry Levan at the Paradise Garage, they had a replacement for me if I fell asleep or if I passed out, which just enabled me to go on with more drug use. And finally, in 81, 82, I just woke up one morning and I had no job. I had screwed up everything. And I went to Narcotics Anonymous and I got clean. And the AIDS epidemic started. And my best DJ friend died of it, David Rodriguez. And I was a year and a half sober, and I started going to these meetings about HIV and healing and spiritual healing. And someone called me up from NA and said, "You got a year clean?" I said, "Yeah." And they said, "Okay, come and interview for this job at Samaritan Village," which was a drug treatment facility. And I got the job and no one wanted to, and nothing was happening in the music industry. It was, again, those doors just opened in that direction. They were, again, it was where God wanted me. I really feel that. Purpose. And I wound up with all the people with AIDS on my caseload because no one wanted them in their group. They were afraid. It was 1983. People didn't know how it was spread, they just didn't have the information. So I went back to school, got my degree in social work because they offered that in my job, and I started becoming an HIV coordinator at different treatment facilities. And in 93, I wrote a book called No Time to Wait, and it was one of the biggest books about HIV infection, alternative treatments, because AZT killed so many people in the beginning because it was a high dose of a very toxic drug given to people who were healthy. They had no right giving it to people who were healthy. You wait till you're sick and then take it. It worked. If you were sick, it worked. Now it's a whole different thing because the triple antiretroviral therapy actually is able to stop the virus. But what they were finding out was back then that the virus would mutate, and it wouldn't mutate 3 times. So they needed that triple antiretroviral. So I wrote this book about it. I learned so much about it. I would go into a doctor's office and I would be able to speak for my clients because I knew the study so well. I would talk to the doctor in his language. And I advocated for a lot of people, and I helped a lot of people. In my book, oh my God, there are even one actor today who says, you saved my life with that book. You know, I followed what you wrote. And then in 1996, I was burnt. I mean, I had worked with people with AIDS from 83 to 96, so 13 years, and I felt toasted in a toaster oven. I was burnt. And I was meditating, and I said, God, I don't know if I can do this anymore. And I heard very clearly, quit your job. I was like, God, stop kidding. You know, you're such a kidder. And and the next day, I quit your job. I heard it for 3 weeks, and I went in, and just on faith, I gave them notice. The last day, you held out on me to the last day, they call from New York and they say, Nicky, Larry Levan's birthday is coming up. We want you to play at this brand new party called Body and Soul, which at the time was the biggest party in New York.
Wow.
I played that one party,
nice.
And I've been touring ever since.
Yes.
So that's all about faith and God and passion and belief.
Yeah, because whenever you definitely have the ability to refresh, get a second chance, refresh your life, get a second chance, and you actually, trust and believe that, your next step is definitely ordered, and you have that faith to step out. I'm actually really happy to hear that you're so wait, are you touring now? Did you miss DJ? Do you still DJ now?
I was in Italy last week. I'll be in London next week.
What?
Yeah.
So you still DJ?
Touring, yeah.
Oh, I love that.
I want to tell a Grace Jones story.
Please do.
Okay. She writes in her book about me because the first time she ever performed was at the gallery. And that happened because a friend of mine was promoting her record. So this is 1976, 77, and she had this record called That's the Trouble on a 12-inch, and it was, the record label was called Beam Junction. Really, it was her manager, basically. And they invited me up to their house to speak to her. And I said, okay, I'll come. And I went with my friend Michael, and before we went up there, we got fazooted. We were toasted. We had smoked this stuff called angel dust. Don't ever smoke it. But I walked in there, and the room was moving. I was getting up from the couch and running to the bathroom and throwing up and coming back. I was a mess. And she wasn't there yet. All of a sudden, she walks in, traditional Grace with the lampshade on her head, and she walks in and she sits down on the couch and she sings me both songs. And I said, come to the gallery, Saturday and I sing that shit and it'll be great. And she leaned in and she said, okay, whatever you're on, I want some. So that's my Grace Jones story. Totally true. And she came that night to the gallery. No one knew who she was. She took a chair. She sang both songs. And one guy from Island Records was there. And she was signed within 4 months.
Wow.
And the rest is her story, as they say.
Well, that's a shameless plug. He knows Grace Jones. So that's awesome. So I wanted to just kind of touch a little bit on just the community aspect of what disco has brought and the healing that it's brought to the community, especially for marginalized groups. POC and queer, Black and queer groups, that were in that time and even currently now all over the world, and how that's really affected us. we are living in Tulsa. We have the centennial was last year, I believe, for the Tulsa Race Massacre. And so, that was 2 years ago, for the Tulsa Race Massacre. And the community now is really beginning to grow and flourish in a way where we are wanting to lean more on each other, and where we're wanting to really help heal each other and things like that. And just to hear how music has really, really, really changed people's lives and healed people. Do you have any types of stories that you've even witnessed where music has really been a beneficial factor?
A healing factor.
Yeah.
You know, because in the 70s everyone knew the songs. People would come and the whole dance floor would sing the words to the song. So if the words were about love and telling, like there was this song called Love Epidemic by the Tramps, and it was spread the love epidemic all around the world, and everyone would be singing that. And that kind of energy goes out, and it really does have a healing effect. And what happened with the gallery was we were like a private club.
Yeah.
So we would give out invitations, membership cards, and people would bring their friends. So the same people came week after week after week, and we encouraged that. Those people, the ones that are still alive, and there are a good number of them, are still friends today, 45 years later. And it promoted something that we don't see very much anymore, which is to build friendships. And I encourage that by having a room where people could talk over the music.
Yeah.
Having seats in that room where people could sit and just have a conversation, so you didn't have to compete with the sound. You actually had a room where you could sit, hear the music, but it's in the background. You know, if you want to go dance, it's upstairs. But meanwhile, let's talk. And those people are all friends. I mean, I have, as friends, most of the people, the 10 people that I'm closest with are all people from that I met at the gallery.
Yeah.
And it was an extraordinary time for bonding. And we knew when the Vietnam War ended, and speak about music changing something, What's Going On by Marvin Gaye, that album came out 1 year, a year later to the month, same month, they signed the Vietnam War Peace Treaty. And everybody had that album. Everybody was singing those words. I know that it played a part in ending that war. I'm sure of it.
Yeah.
It was such an instrument of change, the words on that album. You know, call your brother, you know, your sister. Get it, you know, it was all about coming together and making change happen. And that's what we need right now. We need something musical to bond us. And please, if there's any musicians in the house, live musicians on your next record, please, let's not use, I don't think, and you can use them, but I don't think using all synthesized instruments on a record has the same spiritual energy that live musicians. Think about it. Live musicians take their life to learn and master an instrument. When they play with their heart and their soul. That comes into the recording. That is in the track. You know how those old records used to make you cry sometimes? Name a record recently that made you cry. You cried because it was so bad. Right? But it's like, let's get back to the live musicianship. It's important.
Yes.
It's very important.
I definitely agree.
Think it has a charge that could change. Music can change the world.
Literally.
I believe that. But we need to get back to music.
Yeah, I agree. And so your film, Love is the Message, you were talking about that earlier. We're going to see this film next week, July 22nd. Oh, wait, yeah. Oh, wait, wait a second.
July 1st is,
yes,
and July 2nd is the
okay.
Sunday.
Of course, July 22nd at 2 p.m. Here, where we're going to do, what are we going to see in this film?
You'll actually spend 50 minutes inside the gallery. I set it up so that we talked a little bit, the three of us, Frankie Knuckles, David Mancuso, and I talked about how we built everything, and we go back and forth and talk about it. And then you go into the gallery and you stay there for 50 minutes. It's a night at the gallery. You actually experience the sound, the lighting, and the people.
Wow.
And it's an exciting film just because of that, because you get to be inside a 70s dance music club. It doesn't exist. There's nothing else like it because there wasn't film back then. We were very lucky.
Yes, I'm excited to experience that now. To kind of go off into a little tangent with that idea, do you have any music, or where can we find some of these vibes that you've created? Because I would love to know more how we can create, how we can listen to those.
Well, we're giving this out, and this is the soundtrack to the film. And also, you know, the music is still out there. You could just go online and hear it on Spotify. You can look up, you know, Dr. Love and listen to it. You can listen to Love is the Message. There's an album by Laura Nero called Gonna Take a Miracle, and she's backed by LaBelle, Patti LaBelle, and Sarah, and Nona. And it is the most beautiful. You can just play remember when you could listen to the whole album and like every song? That's one of them. Mm-hmm. That's one of them. You could just put on the CD and you can just go clean your house and just have a great background to it. And that's the kind of music I grew up with. And we should have that again. Not just the one song that's good on the thing. It should be every song.
Yes, you gotta have a vibe. You gotta be able to get into it a little bit more.
Ed Sheeran does it pretty good. I think he produces a lot of CDs that every song is good, but not enough. We don't have it enough.
Indeed, I must admit, I love going to live music shows, whether it be like a live band at a club, or I love that way more than just chilling and listening to it on a record.
Right. Any concert experience is really uplifting. You walk out of there, you feel like you could change the world.
Plus, with everybody in the room on the same, like on one accord,
it gets that charge.
So
right. And everyone's singing the lyrics, right?
Yes, it's amazing. It feels good.
It's really uplifting. And that's what it was every Saturday night at the gallery.
Well, we're going to have that experience here soon, so I hope to see y'all there. I just want to say thank you so much, Nicky Siano.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today in this important conversation, and we also appreciate the folks who are live and watching.
Thanks
and the
for
ones
coming,
in the room.
guys.
Thank you so
very
much for coming. Thank you to all that join us today live and in person. Join us next month for the screening of Love is the Message right here at the Woody Guthrie Center, 2 p.m. July 22nd. And our next Real Talk will be on August 19th at 2 p.m. If you haven't visited Love Saves the Day, oh my goodness, please go and visit it. It's going to be here all the way through October 8th, and you don't want to miss out on that. It's really informative and amazing. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Thank you.
And that's a period.